The Jugurthine War had been waging on for 6 years. Rogue King Jugurtha engaged in a prolonged guerrilla-like war against Rome. Multiple commanders had failed to defeat the king, and it wasn't until the incorruptible Metellus took over command that the Romans achieved several victories. However, scheming and plotting by his deputy Gaius Marius led to his removal of command and the young ambitious Marius to take over. As the campaign of 106 BC was running to its end, Marius's command suffered its baptism of fire. At the First Battle of Cirta, his army was ambushed by a force of 60,000 Mauri and Gaetulian cavalry. Sources conflict on what happened next, although the Romans certainly defeated Jugurtha. As they emerged victoriously, Marius ordered his army to continue the march to their winter quarters, instead of following up the victory and defeating the king once and for all. But the events following Marius's victory at the First Battle of Cirta contest the account that Jugurtha suffered a significant defeat. Marius took great precautions not to suffer an ambush again. The entire trek to his winter quarters, his army would march in battle formations. His deputy, Sulla, commanded the rear in a square formation, while he commanded the vanguard. Marius tasked his scouts to keep an eye on Jugurtha's army and watch out for possible ambushes. On the 4th day of marching, Marius received worrying reports from these scouts. Hostile troops were approaching the Romans from every direction. Moreover, Jugurtha's army size and composition differed wildly from whichever story Marius decided to believe. Confused and unsure of what to expect, he ordered his legionaries to maintain their battle formation and to prepare for the worst. This turned out to be the right call. Before too long, his legionaries trembled at the screams of tens of thousands Mauri and Gaetulian horsemen and soldiers. Their battle cries marked the beginning of an attack by Jugurtha's largest army thus far. The first thing the Romans realized was the positioning of the enemy. They were surrounded. 4 columns charged towards them from every side. According to Sallust, Jugurtha commanded approximately 90,000 troops, his largest force thus far. We don't have an exact figure for the Roman army, but it is safe to assume they were outnumbered. Subsequently, the Mauri charged into the flanks commanded by Sulla and Marius, whereas the Gaetulians charged into the main Roman body. But not all columns attacked at the same time. Sulla was the first to engage in battle against the charging Mauri cavalry. He ordered his infantry to defend the baggage train, while his cavalry resisted the horsemen as best as they could. Besides ferocious close combat between the horsemen and the legionaries, the Romans also suffered hails of javelins thrown by the horsemen, unable to reach Sulla's line. But although some horsemen could not reach Sulla's line, Bocchus' son Volux commanded the Mauri infantry. More mobile, these charged straight into any open area they could find. The Roman vanguard had suffered a similar charge as this was going on, except by a larger force, personally commanded by Jugurtha. This mixed infantry cavalry force engaged in the fiercest battle yet, as Marius's vanguard tried their best to hold their positions and the Jugurthine army gave it their all to break through. The rearguard saw a more apparent division of power. Sulla's men made serious inroads against the Mauri. The final breaking point was Sulla's cavalry. As they inflicted heavy damage against the Mauri lines, the panic spread among these horsemen. Before too long, most of them were routed and they began fleeing. Sulla decided to give chase with his cavalry. As a result, he left the flank of the Roman center entirely exposed. Bocchus, who arrived later to the battle, used this by flanking the Roman lines and enveloping them. When word reached Jugurtha that Bocchus finally arrived, giving battle at the Roman rear, he left the vanguard to ride towards him between friendly lines. Although sources don't specify anything regarding the 4th attacking column, it is assumed that combat emerged on every flank of the Romans by this time. They were hard-pressed due to the simultaneous assaults and numerical superiority of Jugurtha's army. When Bocchus and Jugurtha saw each other, Jugurtha cried out in fluent Latin that the Romans were fighting in vain since he had personally killed Marius shortly before. Jugurtha displayed a bloodied sword to emphasize his point. Some turmoil spread among the legionaries, unsure of what to make of Jugurtha's claims. But before doubt could take over, salvation arrived for the Romans. It arrived in the form of Sulla's returning cavalry. They abandoned their chase of the fleeing Mauri and instead crashed into Bocchus's flank. The charge was so brutal that Bocchus did not even bother to resist it. Instead, with many casualties upon impact, he decided to flee the battle together with whatever remained of his cavalry. Bocchus abandoning the battlefield left Jugurtha isolated. The Numidian king tried to rouse his men to fight with a speech and through leading by example, but the lack of discipline among his soldiers and the structured, drilled and battle-hardened Romans began gaining the upper hand everywhere. Moreover, his levied soldiers, mostly from rural areas, were no match for the Roman veterans. As they tried to keep up the fight, Sulla's cavalry managed to surround Jugurtha. Together with his loyal subordinates, Jugurtha resisted ferociously. Brief savage combat broke out, but they were no match for Sulla's cavalry. Sallust reveals that, but through all on Jugurtha's side and left were slain, he broke through alone, escaping amid a shower of weapons. As this was going on, Marius emerged victoriously from the vanguard. Scattering their opponents, Marius and his bodyguard swerved around to flank the Mauri and Gaetulians fighting on the flanks and rear. With the situation entirely reversed, suddenly Jugurtha's army found itself fighting on every flank and being attacked in the rear. Before too long, most soldiers realized they were on the back foot and fled in a panic. Upon seeing their king escape, the last warriors resisting the Roman bulwark broke rank and fled. Sallust described the chase. There was a fearful sight in the open plains of pursuit, slaughter or capture. Horses and men were thrown to the ground, many of them wounded, without the strength to escape or the will to remain still, struggled to get up, only to collapse immediately. As far as the eye could see, the battlefield was strewn with weapons, armor and corpses, with patches of bloodied earth showing between them. Despite the exact number of casualties unknown, it is safe to assume Jugurtha's army was dealt a very decisive blow. Marius's objectives shifted in the aftermath of the Second Battle of Cirta. Although Jugurtha once again escaped, the focus did not remain on capturing or killing the Numidian king in battle. Instead, he sent a diplomatic envoy to Bocchus. The Mauritanian king lost a large part of his army during the previous battles. Moreover, he understood the implications of his gamble against Rome. There was no way he would be able to avoid Rome's vengeance. Within a week of losing the battle, he sent a diplomatic envoy to Marius to open negotiations. After some back and forth, Bocchus received a very clear offer: deliver Jugurtha, and Rome would forgive his participation in the war. Marius's deputy Sulla traveled to Bocchus's court to negotiate the deal. But, according to Sallust, Bocchus schemed with Jugurtha in the background to abduct Sulla and to hold him as ransom to sue for peace. Although it is doubtful if this would have worked, after all, at the time Sulla was only a deputy commander of lower nobility, it is speculation to think otherwise. All that is known is that Bocchus invited both Sulla and Jugurtha to his court. He kept both parties in the dark of his actual loyalty until the final moment. But Bocchus understood Rome's might, so when the opportunity presented itself, he had Jugurtha's bodyguard assassinated and the king arrested. He handed him over to Sulla, who, together with Marius, brought him to Rome. According to Orosorius, Marius's triumph on January 1st, 104 BC saw Jugurtha and his two sons paraded on the streets. Plutarch reveals how the king met his end. We are told that when Jugurtha had been led in triumph, he lost his reason, and that when, after the triumph, he was cast into prison, where some tore the tunic from his body and others were so eager to snatch away his golden earring that they tore off the lobe of his ear. And when he had been thrust down naked into the dungeon pit, in utter bewilderment, and with a grin on his lips, he said, "Hercules, how cold his Roman bath is." But the wretch, after struggling with hunger for 6 days and up to the last moment, clinging to the desire for life, paid the penalty which his crimes deserved. We don't know why Jugurtha ended up meeting with Bacchus at his court. Sallust and Osurius implicitly ascribe it to naivety, although a man of Jugurtha's cunning must have known Bacchus had no other option but to betray him. We will never know for sure. All that is known is that the man who challenged Rome's might for years with decent success eventually met his end in a Roman dungeon. Bacchus ended up receiving his reward. He was named ally of the Roman people, retained his Mauritanian crown, and gained a third of western Numidia. Jugurtha's half-brother Gauda was confirmed as a new king, and the Gaetulians became an independent entity from Numidia. Ironically, Bacchus was the tangible victor of the war. Having gambled on the wrong side initially, his kingdom was small when the war broke out. Yet by the time it ended, its territory and might increased significantly. Not to mention the power being Rome's ally brought with it. It wasn't until Rome's two civil wars half a century later that Numidia was partitioned, with the western part retaining its independence. In contrast, the eastern part was added to the Roman province of Africa. Another century later, in 40 AD, Caligula annexed the kingdom and divided it into two new provinces. It certainly is a fascinating history, but those tales are for another time. Thank you very much for watching this video. If there's a topic, battle, or event you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also really like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 a month, you already gain access to exclusive content. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.